Welcome to
Recalculating.
a podcast about spiritual detours.
Honest doubt and the unexpected clarity
that comes from questioning the path
Grew
you're
up
on.
with one way to believe,
one way to belong.
one version of God, one direction.
Somewhere along the line, the roadside
Stopped matching the destination.
And I had a choice.
I could keep relying on the map that had me driving in circles or asking some different questions. Hey everyone, welcome back to Recalculating. Before we get started, just a quick public service announcement. However you consume podcasts is totally up to you, I understand. But in these conversations, I don't stop my guests from continuing their stories to define things or describe loaded concepts in detail. I'm just not a good enough interviewer to do that and get things back on track. Instead, in the edit, I add a lot of visual elements to explain things and fill in the blanks. So if you are not watching this podcast on Spotify or the later upload on YouTube, you are missing out on a great deal of content. And that will be no truer than for today's episode. Today, we're concluding my conversation with Luka, our good Adventist child, our trans non-binary guest, who has been sharing their story for the last 2 episodes. In this concluding episode, we dive into how Luka explored faith, doubt, and the questions that were often too risky to ask directly. How did they navigate those waters? We're going to discuss several conundrums that I think will be familiar to people in fundamentalist systems, high demand religions. We talk about the desire to explore these theological questions without feeling like you're falling prey to the author of confusion or committing some act of betrayal by believing in yourself. We talk about the act of educating your way and empathizing your way to a more open theology. We uncover several paradoxes that we don't necessarily name that way, which is, again, the overlays that you need to see. We talk about being called to serve the world while also believing the world is careening towards an irreparable end. We talk about needing to take care of the marginalized community, but also how it was hard to extend care beyond the church doors, how you don't trust anyone that's not inside the system, but once someone's in the system, you trust them completely. We explore how to find the sacred again after deconstruction, which is the heart of what this podcast is about. How to see holiness in ordinary life and create a spirituality that feels alive. Finally, I think what is the most powerful from this episode are the reflections Luka has from carrying a marginalized perspective in faith and what grace, insight, and resilience they were able to discover from living and asking these questions from the edges. This episode is all about paradox, honesty, and transformation. I hope you enjoy it.
Recalculating.
Were you questioning doctrinal stuff, or was it just I
didn't feel like I could fully, because I kept being stuck in my head that the end times predictions, there was still this conviction in my head that the Adventist Church had predicted and prophesied correctly. There was a part of me that's like, I need to prove it wrong so that I can know for sure and be not guilty when I leave. And the other side of me being like, that is the devil tempting you. If you're just trying to seek answers that are against what you're being taught, then that's not good faith digging into it. I was just like, whenever I'd find something that affirmed what I viewed as a more compassionate reality, I would dive towards that. So I'm like, I'm going to take history classes. I'm going to take sociology classes. I was like, I'm going to take a gender studies class. I'm going to take creative arts classes and just try to find something without trying. That was a weird between a rock and a hard place. I felt in between. I was like, if I'm purposefully seeking out anti-Adventist info, then it doesn't count. I was like, I have to just somehow come upon something that contradicts how I think, and then I can't dismiss it. Because in my head, otherwise it didn't feel valid, because I'm like, if I was so used to this idea of things of the flesh aren't pure, and so things that came from me weren't a valid argument, I was always and also some of that OCD tendencies coming out and being addicted almost to a sense of certainty. Like, and any amount of uncertainty was horrible to deal with.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I entered college and immediately got a history professor that was Jewish, and one who snarkily would sometimes make comments specifically to contradict the narrative I was giving forth. He was aware of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He taught Michigan history, so he would visit with his class the historic Adventist Village because it was so entrenched in Michigan history, and it was free to go to. And so he knew about it. And the way, when I say reframe it, it would be something like somebody mentioned Adventism, and I was a little sheepish at that time, but I felt like I couldn't say I wasn't. So I was like, I go to that church, and the teacher was like, Adventists, they celebrate our Shabbat. Like, he made it a point of being like, it's not your Sabbath, it's ours. We're reading old historical texts, and they were supposed to all be rules and different commandments coming from different previous belief systems, and one was like a Babylonian text, and the other one was a clip from the Torah. And the students were like divvying up who had to read what, and I'm like, I'll read that one. And I grabbed it because I already know the 10 Commandments, and he like stopped me and put his hand on the paper, and he's like, but you're not reading the 10 Commandments, you're reading the Torah. And I was like, oh, because it is different. And he made it a point to like not focus on the Christian culture view of history. And frequently he would bring up things that had happened. We're talking about medieval Europe. And so he'd bring up something that wasn't in the textbook, but he'd be like, here is an element of how the Jewish people were being treated during this time. And like, here's where they fit into this hierarchy. And I couldn't, in my head, I can't dismiss a Jewish man that literally teaches Hebrew school. He knows Hebrew. I was like, and in some way, Judaism was kind of seen as like what we came from. It was always portrayed to me as like, we are the spiritual Jews and all of that, the anti-Semitism that comes with that. Of no, we're the real chosen people.
Right.
But I was like, if we got the totem from them, then I can't dismiss him because he knows it. He knows what it came from. I was like, I kind of got to listen to him because people would very often. I was around some Adventists that were like, oh, we're going to celebrate Hanukkah for fun because Jesus did. Stuff like that. That really pushed me further into maybe theology-wise, I don't have to be held according to these beliefs. Because as time went on, there was also contradictions of this was what Christian people of the time were dealing with. But he found it very interesting, the Christian martyr culture at the time. There was actually a lot to be said for people wanting to be martyrs because of what it symbolized at the time. There were some radical people that really wanted that type of punishment to be their consequence because that meant that they would get salvation. And I'm not sure how commonplace that was, but it being brought up by a professor and a history teacher, it was those things again where I'm just hearing these contradictory pieces of information where I'm like, maybe it makes more sense to me if I'm viewing all of this from a very human lens of humans in history learning beliefs and then applying those beliefs and teaching them on down. And then as those beliefs meet with other cultures, they mix with them. It was way more of just this amoral, just kind of witnessing, watching. How is this going to play out? Oh, it makes sense that before, if there's certain Masonic symbols in the architecture, that was portrayed to me as yada yada, Mason conspiracies, yada yada. Somebody, not even, and I want to be careful to emphasize that this wasn't even always just, oh, this is what Ellen White said. It would be random people's added conspiracies, but they were given a platform at our church or at the school. So it was like co-signed by all the administration. And I would hear these things and the staff nodding along. And then I get older and I'm like, well, it makes sense why a Masonic symbols would be on a building with architecture because Masons build buildings. Historically, they were learning about the history of them as a fraternity. And it makes a lot more sense when I know how old of a corporation Sears is. I don't get freaked out if I tear apart the wall and I see Sears wallpaper and realize this was a Sears home. Oh, how old is it? But as soon as the symbols get a negative meaning, then suddenly seeing them is like proof that there is evil around you. And I was able to separate from that as I again, just through academics, which I had always been the escape for me, so it continued to be that.
That's interesting. So you're almost led, you said you were looking for sympathy and empathy for other people in like picking classes and trying to avoid directly looking at doctrine or whatever. What do you think that guide was? Like why that emotion? What were you tying that to in order to examine religion without examining religion?
I desperately wanted some proof, or I desperately wanted the facts of the situation, whatever they were, to be a I wanted the pattern to show more kindness and goodness than it did evil. Because I'm like, if I can know, and a futile effort, but if I can know as much as possible about as much as possible, then I will have more of an even spread of data. And then if like it's more than 50% seems to be coming from a good place and they're all coming from different places, then I can discern that there's not this inherent rot in humanity, because that was always the justification when I had conflicts and issues of it seems like the system around us, including our own, is being hurtful to people. And they would always be like, well, yes, humans can't carry out God's deed perfectly. And humans, of course, will hurt each other. And that's why we want heaven, because we will all be sinless and we won't harm each other anymore. And we will be in communion with God, who will show us that infinite love. And yet, there would be quite a few times where I'd be sitting there and knowing deep in my heart, I wanted to do a different thing and being like, this feels more loving. Why is this not acceptable? Why can't I do this? And because of me not being straight and me not being cisgender, there was a lot of like, I couldn't, or internally, I didn't demonize that sexuality difference. I just was like, I need some proof that it's not evil, because I'm not getting enough. Everybody keeps telling me that, but I'm not seeing it. And the more I look into this, the more human these people are and the more relatable they are, the more I identify with them. So I need something to meet, like, I need a drawbridge between these two ideas. And in some way, I really was looking for proof from different areas that there was good in humanity. Because if there was some good in humanity, then there was a point in trying harder, in making a difference. Because
Yeah.
that's what I saw quite often, was just like, you put your hands up in the air because bad things are going to happen, and all you can do is wait for doomsday followed by perfection and a utopia on earth. And there's almost no point. It's like it was twisted as almost antithetical to wanting God to come again to try to fix things, because things have to get bad for God to come. If you want to work and help people out, you are misguided. And so that's where the like all the things that I'm sitting there like, this should be good, and in other ways adults keep telling me this is a good thing, but then when I apply this empathy suddenly it's a bad thing.
How is, gosh, I don't know how to ask this or how to word it. You're looking for compassion and love and empathy, because that's what it's got to be. You're looking for it for a group of people historically Adventism does not lend it to. You're seeing the value and worth, and you're able to express that. Are you having at the time, are you having like debates about these things, speaking about it, but not so much letting it out that you're talking about yourself too? Or like what did
By
that
this,
process look like?
when I was in high school, it was definitely me trying to be very diplomatic in a sense of, in as like Jesus said, in as much as you have done for the least of these, you have done to me. And yes, he meant like the children, but I would that's where I would always go back to children when it came to stuff like that. There, in terms of racism, was kind of the first cracking point for me, or I should honestly, maybe sexism was, and followed by racism. But there, initially it was like, there are children that are girls that are being unfairly treated. There's children that are black that are being unfairly treated. And I would also see people from out of country they would visit, and you would get like, oh, international students coming to school, and then you're supposed to proselytize, and not all of these kids are Adventist, but then kids start acting racist to them and xenophobic and just like rude because they're not American. And the contradiction in that as well. Of I thought we're supposed to be a good witness. I thought we're supposed to be a light on a hilltop, and this isn't supposed to be an issue for us because that extremely outdated song where it's like red and yellow, black and white, all are precious in his sight. Jesus loves all the little children. And so I was like, why is it not the case when it's these children? And like obviously if you have the kid in front of you, you're not I didn't see adults be cruel to a child because of a specific marginalization or them being not the norm or Adventist kids, but they might as well have because I just interacted with non-Adventist kids so rarely. There would so often adults were taking out their resentment on children around me. And I think some of that was just due to a lot of the sexist expectations that women just will do childcare and are more nurturing. So you end up with these really, really resentful people, and everyone's like, well, they're a woman, so it must be good enough. And I'm like, they're actually pinching the children so hard, they're breaking their skin. This is not a loving person. But that's a little bit to the side of the point. It was always I would always look towards the most defenseless and argue from that point. And also, I was gesturing towards more intersectionality. I was like, well, if we protect gay people's right to marriage, then we can protect the separation of church and state in the law. I was trying to be methodical in that way somewhat. It was stuff like that. And then when I went to college, in my head, if they're not Christian, obviously the world accepts sin, so all these people are gonna be pro-gay, like pro-trans people. No, spoiler, they weren't, because we paint the world as a caricature as well in the group. But I was like, I just need to get to this safe place, and then I will be able to make logical, sound arguments, and people will understand where I'm coming from, and we'll all be on the same page. When I would get out there, I would try to be more open about my identity, but I was smack dab in the middle of a weird, semi-online culture war over definitions, what it means. The side effect of people being cast aside by larger society, often people get very, very nitpicky about definitions to prove their validity. And you can see it in Adventism as well, where it's like how you can prove you're the real Christians because other Christians don't see Adventism as a real church. So you just keep asserting you're the mostest and the bestest.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that. I just continually kept very quiet until I eventually went away for university. It was just as I continued to express myself and try to self-actualize with each of those steps, I would try to live my truth, for lack of a better way of putting it, as time went on. My mom accepted me. It was very hard for her to understand and accept my identity, because for her that was like a door shutting on my ability to have happiness, because that portrayal of the happiest relationship you can ever have will be a man and a woman getting married.
Sure.
So even if I found someone else, in her mind, I was kept away from the most happy I could be. So, but like she never made an ultimatum or did anything that sacrificed my well-being in the home. But it was very, very rocky in the beginning. There was a lot of just complete bewilderment that, what I'm even saying. And it didn't help that I had been away at academy for 3 years. So there was also that disconnect of like not knowing each other in our current version of ourselves anymore.
How is it seems like you've always been attempting to create a space for yourself, always had to. Is that an ongoing process still? Are you in a good space now in terms of community or spirituality? What does your spirituality look like now? Is there any? Are you out of that game entirely.
It's funny because as I have become less, by definition, less spiritual, the less spiritual I cognitively feel, the more I understand the people growing up that would talk about feeling the spirit and that just that pull and things being just so spiritually moving. And for me, there's a lot of me applying an almost not literal, but just a symbolic sacredness to life all around me. Um, almost in the to the vein of when I hear people like joke about, or it's not even a joke in a lot of cultures and stuff, like viewing the earth as a living source and the things on it as living beings, less for the purpose of like, oh, I see a tree as a human, but shifting your perspective in a way that really aligns with a lot of indigenous belief systems of how I've heard it put around is like, there are other types of people and we live on this earth with all other peoples. There's humans that are people, but more viewing other life forms as people is less about seeing them as able to have a discussion with you and more about seeing them as able to take up just as much space as you. Like in the way that you can dehumanize a person by talking about them as if they are an animal or by talking about them as if they are an object, because that's the way we see the world. You can inherently not dehumanize, but take agency away from and not ascribe a certain right to a creature by referring to it as lesser than. And however that language comes out for different people, for me, that feels very spiritual. And growing up, I was always taught in Adventism that, like, yes, there's this pantheism where they believe that the rocks and trees are their gods and nature is a god and everything around them is a god. And that is extremely evil way to think. And like getting older and being, I think you were taking it very literal and in some ways from very childlike understanding of belief systems. Like everything is so literal to the point that you're arguing over the exact adjectives used in the text versus people that are discussing the cycle of life and how, like, referring to in the same way you view God as giving you life, that's a very sacred thing, and that reinforces him as an all-powerful being. You can say the same thing for water giving you life and that making it powerful in turn. It doesn't mean that you think it has superpowers, but you are putting in context how interdependent you are to a system larger than yourself without having to worship that.
There's like an openness to being a part of multiple systems, really, of ecosystems of things living off of each other, and like in a way that I do think high demand religions cut off, where you're almost not allowed to appreciate. Well, you're really not allowed to appreciate anything. Like everything is a thank God thing, which or one of our kids is not ill, but has a liver thing and is on steroids for it. And so they were working. We got her on them for a couple of weeks. The numbers were doing well. Steroids were working. And like my mom, I was telling my mom about it, and she was like, "Oh, praise God." And I was like, "And Arthur Noble, the guy that invented prednisone. That's not. This wasn't like a miraculous thing. We went to the doctor. They gave us medicine, and the medicine's working. It's okay to appreciate the medical professionals that were
Yeah.
along this path. They deserve." Because it took a long time to figure out what was going on and how to treat it. It wasn't just, and it felt like all of that hard work and all the trips to the doctor and all the times they were poking her little arm and biopsying her, like that was all just pointless human nonsense. And all we really needed to do was pray. And it's like, well, I think the prednisone did a lot of heavy lifting. It almost felt wrong earlier in life not to do what my mom did, but like there are other things going on in the world, other things working together. And I know that's a weird example, but like it's
No,
it's weird to like take your little Sabbath walks and appreciate nature, but also keep those items as completely inanimate and unnecessary. It's like God put them here and they're pretty. It's yes, but they're also producing this oxygen. There's all this thing. There was a video going around this week of I think it's like the way the plants and the earth are taking in chlorophyll, maybe. I don't know. But it looked like a wave on a set timer just going around, like the earth was processing sunlight and pumping it out like a heartbeat. The entire earth working together thing that is like a beautiful reality if you're not closed off to such kinds of ideas. And like those are the kinds of things that I find special about the world with a more open worldview.
Just allowing that feeling of awe, I think is how
Yes.
how I categorize it.
Awe.
And it's just like a feeling so big, it's like you're almost choking on it, like it comes up under your throat, but it's not uncomfortable. It's just this swell that's bigger than yourself. I never, or I should say, in the church, I always felt compelled to try to get that feeling in time with what's going on around me. Like, oh, they're doing a big baptismal fount and they're getting all these baptisms at once, and like this is the time where I should feel it, and I'm like waiting for it and then ready to capture the feeling and then label it like this was related to this. And I would even be thinking in the moment like, oh, I need it to feel real, because I didn't want a fake story, but I was like, I need it to feel real, and then I can talk about how much this is proof that God is part of it. Like searching for the feeling as like a stamp of approval that's like you're tuned in enough. Because if you're not feeling it, it's not that it's not spiritual, it's that you're not tuned into the spirituality or whatever. But I experienced a lot more of that when I wasn't stuck under truly the insecurity. You're taught to be very insecure about how you think in Adventism. You can't just let the emotion come to the surface. You are trying to shape it, mold it, and make it this perfectly fully formed, pure thing that doesn't contradict any belief system you have by the time you even think it. You really just keep yourself from being in the moment in that way. I know it was always taught as well that you're not supposed to follow your heart, and that you needed to be thinking about that too.
It was I think about that all the time. The not trusting yourself, not following your heart, not leading on your own understanding. But what's the other option? Like the other things we were doing, we were just finding ways to say that's not what we were doing anyway. Or we would actively do the opposite of what we felt was truly inherently right because it was our own understanding. It'd be like, well, that's what I want to do, so that can't be right. You didn't
Yeah, I
trust
did that a lot.
those things. I think that was always so interesting, because why were we so unwilling to trust ourselves, even though we were constantly educating ourselves with what we thought God would want to come back out of us? But it was still like, don't trust that you've done a good enough job at that. I don't know. I've got one more question, because we've been talking for a couple hours. I don't want to keep you too long. But just because you have such a very interesting perspective from both the tight-knit communities you were in, but also a non-binary, fluid, trans identity from this system, has anything about that, like that process, taught you something special about divinity or resilience that you could not have learned being just a regular old boring cisgender person like myself?
Oh, you know, what I've heard it referenced outside of myself. This is not coming from me, but paraphrased, growing up with the Bible, God made me a woman in the same way that God made grapes while giving us the ability to create wine from them. And that, along with that, there is so much of just this kind of quiet reflection of like, in a way that I don't even think goes against the idea of a god or multiple gods. The way we as humans find relationship with what we characterize as God, what we make God, how we view him or her or them in our minds. In the idea of like God made us in his image, the way you so often create a mirror for your life. You create a mirror for your life in what you worship. And in the same way that people say that they can feel like they see this thing on earth and it reminds them of God in these moments, God's love, God's whatever, it's like I will see things in how people describe religion and I'm like, that reminds me of humans. That reminds me of humanity. In this weird inverse of seeing how much people have built in a way that I'm not taking it away from their religion, but like the people that were moving the religion forward, whatever it is, like whether you see the Catholic Church but like I see on the ground floor the nuns and the people that have committed to working hard and, how much people at a ground level make a religion and make a belief system and a faith.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see a religion as well, I'm always thinking about that and the people that made it, whether it's a piece of art, a song, or somebody's story. I'm like how human it is in a beautiful way. If I deify anything, it is the things that I see as the goodness of humanity and what I interpret as like things other people see as so good, they have to portray this as the best, as a god thing, because you want in some ways it's like reflection of how humans want to be better, that they try to deify an ultimate pure good. You want that to exist so much. I think that reaffirms a lot of people's desire in their heart to be that as well. And I don't know if that's something that just comes from me being trans, but I think there's something about being trans that allows me a bit of comfortability just watching from the sidelines as other people shape their reality for themselves and recognize that for all of the hard work that goes into that, whether that's creating a new genre of music or coming up with a new fashion style or completely changing your life, devoting your life to a religion or leaving it.
It's beautiful. Well, how do you make peace with everything you've left and what you've carried with you?
I think I do it through stuff like this, through like talking about it. I started during the pandemic during quarantine, lockdown, making TikToks online. And it was the first time that I didn't back out of talking about Adventism from my perspective with like my face attached. And I've seen other people enter the space and talk either because they saw a video of mine or they were already making videos, and because they commented on my video, I get to connect with their experience. Some of them end up deleting their content and leaving the app. Others of them go into other areas and it highlights and sparks an interest in just delving into these things in general. But for me, seeing other people pop into the conversation, like yourself as well, and then seeing how much more each individual has to their life now after leaving. Some of it coming from Adventism and some of it coming afterwards. Nobody's just an ex-Adventist or bitter about the church. Even if someone is bitter about the church, they're also, you look at their page and they're also, you can be like, oh, you're deeply into, well, I don't know, even the surface level stuff where you're like, oh, you're always doing your makeup different. Or this person is really into this band. Or this person is always running and hiking or whatever it is. Like you just, in an authentic way that I think a lot of people during the pandemic encountered in different fronts if they were entering online spaces. Sometimes an algorithm spitting a video in your face is the thing that shakes you out of your norm being the norm. And it's harder for your brain to refute for your brain to repeat these negative ideas of yourself when you are seeing people that you would literally never see in any other context. And they're so real.
And you feel so much more seen. It's like, oh, that's not
Yeah.
just me, or that's not just in my head. Like other people from wildly different family situations or whatever internalize this thing in a similar way that I did. Like I'm not crazy or I'm not alone. Yeah, because I got on TikTok during quarantine and found your videos, and that made me say, oh, people, here's a space someone can talk about their life in Adventism. Because I didn't know there were spaces like that. I didn't know there were like Reddit pages and things that people could talk about it. And just coming across one of your videos got me started making my own, and now we're here talking. And so it is. I appreciate greatly that you share your story and all the things that you talk about. I understand a lot of things just from whether I had the same type of Adventist experience or whether I've just heard about it or whatever. So much of your, I really like your content of the captions on the screen with you doing something in the background, where it's just it's seemingly innocuous situation, but it's like we've all done it. All Adventists know exactly what you're talking about. And it's just, those are really
Good. I need to make more of those videos.
those are
then.
extremely comforting because it's just like, oh, I know how that feels. And it's just a quick little sense of like having your soul seen. I greatly appreciate all of your posts and what you do and your openness and vulnerability, and obviously your time and talking to me today. This was great, and good Lord, I've taken a lot of your time. I'm going to stop.
That's completely
taking your
fine.
time.
I am a yapper when it comes to this subject.
Sure.
Recalculating.